Okay, I think that should be enough time for people to show up, I think. Hopefully my my microphone's working. Um, this is my first solo echo, so I need to get some feedback. If people can hear me, let me know. So today's episode is going to be mostly about the Cilium external workloads, which is actually a beta feature for a while now, since I believe Cilium 1.9 release. And the reason why I want to sort of show off the feature and sort of give a preview of what's going to be available in 114 as a new addition to what you can do with external workloads is because at the KubeCon, the CiliumCon half-day Cilium mesh concept was introduced, and that's sort of a forward-looking future of how to deal with external workloads. And I wanted to show off what you can do right now with Cilium because there's a direct follow-up to a question one of the audience members had at the end of the presentation because they wanted to know what was possible right now. And so I'm going to do that. But first, let's do the news. Thanks, Peter, for letting me know the audio is good. I've been trying to work on it like yesterday and to make sure I got everything right. So here we go. Oop, that's the wrong one. Let's do this one. Yeah. So the news. So we have KubeCon call for proposals is coming up in a few weeks, and let's. I'm going to thank Dan for actually putting the news together for me for this episode. Yep, there's talk submissions. Our deadline is coming up quick, so in mid-June. So if you are thinking about putting a proposal in, this is a very good time to do that. I have a long weekend this weekend, so I was going to work on that. Memorial Day is Monday, so I'll be drafting a CFP on a kayak Monday, probably somewhere in Alaska. So that is the first item. The other item is a Blue Sky has reached 100,000 users, and the reason why we call this out is because the last couple of weeks, Dan actually retooled the Capture the Flag platform that he put together for KubeCon Europe. And he actually added a Blue Sky invite as the reward for people to try to win when he retooled it. And we actually got a lot of people, like 1,000 people attempted to get that invite. They are basically digital gold right now, Blue Sky invites. So if you are interested in that, we're actually probably going to be running this again when we get access to more invites. So watch Twitter announcements and the Slack channel announcements because we'll, I'm sure Dan will drop another CF Capture the Flag proposal run when an invite goes live. So that's really fun. I really like that that platform he's put together. I'm hoping I can add some interesting scenarios to it, and we can just keep using it. It's great. So the next thing, yeah, it was World Day, and in honor of eBPF, they were very focused on the fact that we all need bees to survive. So take a look at that, and be aware of your friendly bumples and honeybees who are doing the pollinating. I currently have a problem with not murder hornets, just hornets. It's that time of year in Alaska where either it's a mosquito year or it's a hornet year, and this year it's going to be a hornet year. So I am happy to see the bees, not so happy to see the murder bugs. So what else do we have? The Gateway API has reached 0.7, and they're aiming to hit 1.0 by the next KubeCon, which is pretty great. Like that's actually a pretty important advancement, even for Cilium specifically, because a lot of the Cilium mesh and the service mesh capabilities are going to depend heavily moving forward on the Gateway API. So that is really interesting to see how fast they're making progress to 1.0 there. So that's good. And the last bit of news is apparently Microsoft has a new Linux distribution, a specific distribution for Linux container host on the AKS service. So that is interesting because everyone needs their own Linux distribution. I don't have my own yet, but we all need our own Linux distribution. I will definitely take a look at that, and I'm sure it's just got optimizations to make it work with the AKS APIs effectively, which is not dissimilar to what we see from Amazon, and so it totally makes sense. Okay, so upcoming events, we have Kubernetes Community Days in Zurich in mid-June, around the same time as the CFPs are due for the North American KubeCon. And there is a GrafanaCon coming up on June 12th and 14th, which is always a good thing. Grafana is a great tool. In fact, I was just talking to one of my friends. She was over for porch beers last night, and she actually works in a it's not the Seismic Center anymore. She works at the infrasound. They do infrasound arrays at the university, and she's talking about she has to learn how to make Grafana dashboards for the telemetry from their electronics at So that is fascinating. Like Grafana is everywhere. So not just in traditional IT. So it is everywhere because data is metrics and data graphs are everywhere. Okay. So I think that's sort of news. I think I can get into what I want to cover now, which is the external workloads. But I am actually going to show you a demo of how to set it up using the latest snapshot release from Cilium, and I have reasons for that, which I will get to near the end. But I really want to highlight that the snapshot release are a new concept. I think we have 3 now. And the intent is to do them once a month, and they're about to cut. I shouldn't say we, the maintainers are about to cut another snapshot release in the lead up to the 1.14 full release. And the snapshot, I love the idea of the snapshots. I think it's a great way, especially for people in the community who are tracking features in development, to get hands-on without having to build the tools itself, right? They're binary releases. It's just that they are not full releases, right? So it's a great way to see how new features interact with your existing deployment scenarios, or even how things advance. So you get a bonus feature, which I'm sort of going to show you, just because of the encryption, the WireGuard encryption advances meant to service some other workloads actually helps in the external workload situation, but it's only available in the snapshot. So that's why I'm going to run the snapshot releases right now. So let me flip over to my terminal, and hopefully hopefully everyone can read that. It looks good, I think, on what I'm looking at. So if the terminal font is not legible, please let me know and I can try to boost it up in the terminal profile. So I'm going to get started now. I had to switch away from my looking at myself so I can see some other things on the big monitor. So that looks good. Let me start. So what I'm going to do or show you is I actually have a couple of VMs running in my local network. The first VM is actually just running a single node K3S Kubernetes distribution. And the second node is going to act as an external workload. It's just a VM, right? The important things when working with an external workload with Cilium is that the external VM, the VM you want to try to end up writing network policy for, right, has to have node level connectivity with the nodes in the cluster. So in a lot of ways, this is a similar requirement to how you would set up a multi-cluster under Cilium, where you, instead of being two different Kubernetes clusters, you have a Kubernetes cluster, and then you have this VM that's halfway between being its own cluster and being sort of a virtual node inside your Kubernetes cluster. So it's sort of a in-between thing. And this is also why it's a beta feature. So it's not every release that gets more formulated, as I think, as people try to take a look at, especially customers who want to make use of this. This just gets better every release. And so that's why I'm going to use the snapshots, because encryption is coming for this. So let me start by just showing off. I'm just starting with I should be blank. I did rehearse this. This is not complete YOLO. So I don't have any Cilium IP stuff right now, and neither in the VM. But I do have K3S running. Right? And if I get the nodes, they are going to not. Oh, why is it? Did I accidentally? Let me uninstall something from here. I want to get the nodes back to a unready state. Well, I've clearly not gotten back to baseline. Every time you try to YOLO a demo, right? Okay, Cilium's not installed, so let me get Cilium installed. But I'm using the latest Cilium version of the CLI tool, and actually it supports the latest snapshot. So I'm actually going to install the snapshot, and this will take just a second because that's to download the images. But while that's happening, so I can talk about, so the external workloads basically end up using the cluster mesh facility. You end up talking to the cluster mesh API server, as well as the Kubernetes API server itself to get information. So the external workload ends up running a Cilium agent. In this case, is going to run it as a Docker image with special arguments, and that will basically instruct it on talking to the remote Kubernetes system. So I think I just have to wait for it to get right. Okay, so that's Cilium's installed. And now I just need to enable cluster mesh And I'm using a node port service type because I don't want to deal with an external load balancer. I just am doing this in a test environment. And yes, it's cluster. You definitely don't want to do this as a node port in production because it is fragile, but because of the test environment, I know the node's not going away here. So I have cluster mesh. So let's, I'm going to go ahead and deploy the Death Star service from the, from the tutorial and guides. That way I have something that I can show I can talk to, right? So now I believe I can do, let's just make sure everything's up and running, right? Okay, so the X-Wing and TIE Fighter are running. So if I just communicate into the existing Kubernetes cluster, I should be able to land both types of ships because I don't have any policy, right? This should just work. And then if I go into the VM, I can't even, I mean, this won't work because it has no concept of this DNS name, right? Because the DNS name is entirely, so I shouldn't do silent. The DNS name is only available from inside the cluster, right? And that's one of the things the external cluster setup will actually get you access to the Cube DNS service from the VM, so you can then access all the services in the cluster by their internal cluster DNS name. So let me get that set up right now. So cluster mesh is configured, and now and most of this right now is actually in the documents. I'm just sort of running through it with some slight variations, and I'll try to point out when I've made a change. So, for example, I'm going to create a cluster mesh virtual machine called Boba Fett in the default namespace. You have to allocate it a very small pod CIDR. Basically, the external workload ends up creating a Cilium node and a Cilium endpoint, and that endpoint ends up looking like a pod, and it needs just like one IP address, right? To make it all work. So, and then I'm actually adding additional labels in line with the Star Wars demo theme, right? Bounty hunters and Boba Fett instead of Empire and TIE Fighter, right? So this should now create. And actually, we have CRDs for this. So get CW. So I have an external. You have external workload. The labels are there, and in the document example that you run through in the guide for external workloads, it actually shows you how to use just the name as the label match or the matching condition in policy. But I'm actually want to use I still want to use the org, right? So that's why I added these additional labels. So it's very similar to how you would label workloads already in your cluster. You just have to label it when creating the external workload, which mimics a lot of the same Cilium structures that you'll get when a Kubernetes pod spins up, right? Because that's what the Cilium operator does, is make sure all the Cilium specific analogs like Cilium endpoints, Cilium node are created when appropriate. So I have the endpoint, but I don't have actually I have the workload, but I don't have a Cilium endpoint yet for Boba Fett, and there's no node yet because that only gets created once the agent running on the external VM gets talks to the Kubernetes API, and actually these things get created as part of that process. So let's now actually create the install script. So the Cilium tool, the CLI tool, will create an install script that you then move to the VM, and it will basically start Docker container with all the correct settings. So it's basically a command where you basically generate, it's a VM install, and you basically tell it what file name to output the script into. And let me show you. And there's some specifics in here. It basically encodes what cluster API endpoint it's going to be talking to as a default, right? What image, because you want to match the images for the Cilium agent that's already in the cluster, and the overrides. And I'll use that when I'm working with the encryption later. But the idea is that it ends up calling Docker with a whole bunch of specific options, right? And so you could do this all by hand, but the install script makes it somewhat bulletproof. Somewhat. You can run into problems still with the firewall. I should have said that I've actually turned off the firewalls on both these VMs for just to make it easy in my test environment. If you don't turn off the firewall, then you have to follow the same firewall rules that you would for node level connectivity between Cilium as well as the cluster mesh. And that's all documented. The details of what ports need to be open are in the docs. But I didn't want to get hung up on that for 30 minutes, right? Because is it DNS or your firewall? Well, I need the DNS for right now. So let me actually move this script over to my local. Oh, I forgot. The one thing you have to do is to make this work is the host name for the external VM actually has to be the same as the name you give it in the external workload. That needs to match so that the Cilium agent is able to know which external workload to interact with, right? So it's basically updating some of the objects that represent it in the Kubernetes CRDs, right? So I need to fix that. It needs to be Boba Fett, right? I believe I did Boba Fett. Yeah, so Boba-Fett. So I need to do and if I SSH back in, host name's updated. So now, fingers crossed, I should just have to run this script. And give it a second, and it will hopefully if I haven't messed something up. Okay, just check. So that looks like it finished. And now I can check some things. So once Cilium is actually, the external workload is actually in communication, the Cilium agent is in communication. Let me just show you Docker. I have to be sudo for this. I actually have a Cilium agent running, right? And as a container, once I should do this too. I also now have a whole bunch of Cilium, what you expect to see in terms of a Cilium related network devices ready to go. So, and then if I come back, I do, now if I get Cilium nodes, I see a Boba Fett node, which has an internal IP address of 10.192.1.2, and the internal, that's the node level address, right? This is my local network segment. This is the K3s servers, address that I can ping, and this is the VM's address on the same local network. So that seems to be working. If I look at the endpoints, I now have a Boba Fett endpoint. So this is where it gets interesting. I'm actually now also, that script also updated the name servers so that this is actually the address for the cube DNS. So if I do a lookup now for the Death Star service against this server, it returns. So I now have access to the service names, and that means that I should now also be able to just run that curl command, right? So let me do a slightly different with the connect timeout. And the ship has landed because I don't have any network policy yet. So let's actually put some network policy in place. I'm just going to take the rule. Got to find the, yeah, I just want to take the rule from the existing documentation, right? That's all I want to do. There it is. Sorry, I've had to find it. I had to find it in my script notes. So I'm cheating a little. So this is from the rule corresponding to the snapshot release. I actually don't think this has changed since 13.2, but I want to make sure I'm consistently using the snapshot release materials for right now. And if I apply that, I can actually, let's go back into it and get network policy rule 1. Anyone who's done the tutorial should be familiar with this. Get CNP rule 1. Let's just get the YAML. And what we have is the match labels is for the Death Star. So the Death Star backend pods will only accept connections on port 80 if org is Empire, right? So we can do the thing from the docs where the X-Wing doesn't get there. The TIE Fighter gets there. And now Boba Fett shouldn't get there either, because Boba Fett is labeled not as Empire, right? So what if this will time out in 10 seconds. So I now have network policy that impacts the external workloads. So this little VM is sort of acting like another container, right? Or another pod in the system. And so you're going to, as long as it's labeled appropriately, you can get access via the same network policy. So now that basically covers what's actually documented in the guide. Now I want to show you how can we actually update that external workload with new labels, right? So that it will conform to the policy we have. I want to make it part of the Empire instead of bounty hunters, right? So let's get back, and I want to overwrite the labels, just the org label, right? I'm going to overwrite the org label in the Cilium external workload for Boba Fett and just make it org empire. Unfortunately, that's not sufficient because while that helps inform the other objects, they are still haven't been updated. They're still using the labels when the agent contacted the API for the first time. So get new policy. Sorry, get node. Sure, I'm going to describe Cilium node Boba Fett. And it is still showing as bounty hunters. So we actually need to recreate this. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to delete the node. And this should have also deleted the endpoint, but it hasn't. But the external workload definition is still there. So now I can actually just do a Docker restart on this container, and that should restart the process and create the node with the right labels. So I just do sudo docker restart Cilium. This is on the external VM. And now I should actually have I don't. No, there it is. It just took a second, right? Because the container has to spin up. So I have the node, and I should have the endpoint now, right? Now, if I look at the node again, I am now org empire. So if I run the landing command now, it succeeds. So I've now updated the labels on the external workload to match the policy. You know, I could have created different policy that allowed the bounty hunters as well as empire, but I wanted to show this. This is still sort of the creaky corner of the beta feature, but it works, right? It just needs a little more polish, and it's almost like a fully automated solution. So now that covers the baseline, and now I want to show you something that you can do only with the snapshots. So in the documentation right now, in the stable documentation, which is version 1.13.2, it says that you can't actually use the transparent encryption feature with an external workload, but you can with the snapshot. So I'm going to actually tear all this down and build it back and install Cilium with node encryption. So node to node encryption. It's a feature that's going to be in the next full release, but it's in the snapshots right now for testing. And the idea is, like, up until this point in 1.13, you had pod to pod encryption, but you didn't have or node encryption, right? And because these external workloads are not really pods, right? Like when I do that curl, it's not really coming from like a pod namespace, it's coming from the host namespace. And the node level encryption makes it possible now take care of that, encrypt the node level transport into and out of nodes in the Kubernetes cluster. And this helps, as a side effect, the external workload case. So let me clear the decks here. I just want to clean up everything. Give me 1 second. I just want a clean start so that first I want to uninstall on the VM side and clean up all the Cilium stuff there. And I'm actually just going to do a reboot on that system so it comes up pretty clean. And then I'm gonna pull down the policy. Because I'm not going to show the policy again. It'll just get in the way. And then I also, while I'm at it, just going to also delete the Death Star deployment. I'll put it back. I just want to make sure I have a clean starting point. Okay, so I've cleaned that up. Let me go ahead and also delete the Cilium node Boba Fett. And the endpoint, I'll just recreate all this. And then I'll go ahead and once this is done, I'm going to uninstall Cilium so I can reinstall it with node level encryption enabled. So Cilium uninstall. And now I'm going to go back and in production, you do this kind of stuff in Helm, right? But this is a test environment. I just want to get back to clean situation. In fact, let me reboot the K3S node so it starts with no Cilium anything, including the eBPF programs. Yep, just want to make sure that looks clean. I've been having a problem with this. I may need to kick this one in with an actual power off. I'm going to power it off and power it back on. Make sure it's actually clean. I'm doing another screen. All the VirtualBox stuff. There's no need to pollute the screen share. So while that's coming up, let's see, should be up in a second. Yep, there it is. So IP address here. No Cilium anywhere. So let's go ahead and do the magic that turns on node encryption. And I'm going to go over these extra bits. So this is actually in the documentation for the snapshot. It actually talks about these new options in WireGuard encryption in the install tool. So node encryption will basically, it tells it to turn on the node-to-node encryption. And I'm also giving it an extra config to change the default opt-out labels because I want node encryption on my K3S node. And by default, the control plane, I believe the default label that the Cilium feature looks for is the control plane label. And normally in you don't want to do node encryption on the control plane node because other worker nodes need to be able to talk to it without potentially running afoul of certificate mismatches, right? Like you don't want that communication to break. It's sort of critical. So all the worker nodes, it's safe to do the node-to-node encryption, but not the control plane node. And so because I'm doing a single node test environment, it's okay for me to turn this off. So I'm just turning it into a label I'm not string that I'm not using. And that will make sure that it works in this environment. But the default label is reasonable and safe. But I'm not doing reasonable and safe. I'm doing testing. So let me go ahead and run this, and this should create and install with node level encryption on. Oh, while that's happening, just checking the chat while that's going on. The question from Tony, I see in your demo that I should not use the same CRD on the cluster nodes. I think that's true right now. I believe they're working on making it possible to have overlapping. I haven't tested it yet. I know I've seen some discussion and some issues where that is possible or going to be possible. And in fact, and this is all moving, right? I'm not even sure we're going to need the pod CRDs for this external workload stuff, because I think because we have the node encryption or the node, it may be refactored to the point where it's just treating it as a node level communication. So there is work going on. This is why it's not a fully baked. Part of the reason why it's not a fully baked feature. It definitely needs more testing and more people using it for sure. So okay, so that's installed, and I need to now set up the cluster mesh again, just like I did before. I'm just that was basically one of two changes I needed. It's basically enable WireGuard, enable node encryption. In fact, we just have to do a small change on the install script arguments when we run it on the external workload. So I'm just going to go ahead and deploy the Death Star again, just so I have something to talk to. And I'm going to create Boba Fett just like I did before. And now I'm going to create the new install script. And I should say I have to create the new install script because one of the things that the install script does is it actually pulls in not the WireGuard keys, because that's actually communicated via annotations at the node level, but it does pull in the certificate you need to talk to the API, the cluster mesh API server. And that's going to be different for every time you do a fresh install. I'll just show you. It's one of the things, like I said, you can do all this by hand, but this just makes it super easy. And this is the certificate. It basically mounts the necessary certificate so you can talk to the API server securely. Because it's really an etcd proxy, right? And it's using the secure communication mechanism for etcd. And so you're basically, you do need to sort of treat the install script a little carefully because it has the CA certs in it, just so we can verify, right? But I actually have a feature suggestion. Like there are other ways to do that install script so that it's more amenable to other automation. So if people are really interested in this, there's a lot of room to make this more robust. This is, I consider this like, this is enough to work, but if you want to really run with this, there's a lot of ways to contribute some niceties, like some automation tooling that's better than this install script, right? Because there's several automation packages. Like off the top of my head, I would just reach for Ansible and want a way to do it. But just point out that's why I have to regenerate this, because it does. If I did it with the old script that I already had on the system, it wouldn't work because the CAs have changed, because I did a complete wipe of the Cilium and reinstall. So now I have it on the system, and now I need to run it with slightly different arguments. So I need to tell it to enable WireGuard. I need to tell the Cilium agent it's going to run under Docker to enable WireGuard and enable node encryption with the opt-out, right? And I should say these are sufficient arguments. I'm not actually sure if I need all three of these. I'm still testing it. Like, I'm just amazed it works. I'm going to show you it works. This is sufficient, but not necessarily the necessary. There might be too much here. I also know the snapshot should also no longer need this, but the Cilium install tool still turned this on, the LM7 proxy off when you have WireGuard encryption on it. It was a limitation in encryption before, or I should say, I think it was an interaction between cluster. I forget, but it was required if encryption was enabled. And in the snapshots right now, this should no longer be required. That's another cool thing about snapshots. It's just that all the pieces aren't there, and for this to CLI to know that, right? So the CLI tool is still assuming the stable release limitations, right? So I'm hoping that the next snapshot and the corresponding point release of the CLI tool will make this not disabled as part of auto detection of, when the CLI tool is doing the sanity checks. Cool. So just want to point that out. So I should be able to run this, and this structure. Let me go back to here. I'm actually following the structure of the arguments based on this. Like, the first argument is the image. I want to make it blank so it uses the default. I want the second argument to be blank because it's whatever the default is. But I want the third argument to be these config overwrites. The config overwrites just get tacked onto the end of the Cilium options. So that's a way to basically experiment with additional features that aren't the default, right? Or haven't been auto detected. So in this case, because encryption being enabled hasn't been auto detected, I can still do it. I'm actually hoping as we move forward, we can actually just auto detect that, and then the install script will just add that too, right? Because once you have encryption on in a cluster mesh, like, everything in the cluster mesh has to be encrypted. I don't think you can mix and match yet. But you can manually, if you turn encryption on now, you should be able to do it here. Oh, I don't have to sudo. No, it'll ask. So hopefully I did do this less than 8 hours ago, but who knows? YOLO, right? Demo gods are not always. And I feel if this doesn't work, like I said, this is a snapshot, and I feel like if I got it to work once, I've made progress, right? So I think it worked. Encryption is enabled, it says. So let's okay. So let me look at the IP address. There should be a Cilium. There's a Cilium W. There's a WireGuard device on the external VM. There should be a WireGuard device on the external, on the K3S node. And if we do the check, the documented check for making sure everything looks good. I had it. I thought I had it in my show notes. I may have to, let me bounce the docs real quick. So like I said, there are docs. And if I go, this is the snapshot docs. If I go to encryption, let me do WireGuard. Just want to run through install encryption. I want to make sure I understand. Yeah, so let me bounce into a one of the Cilium agents in the cluster, right? And then I need to just make sure it has a peer, right? And it has, looks like it's enabled. Cool. And then let's do the, I really like this one. The troubleshooting one, you can actually see, we can actually see which IP addresses are allowed. And this is the external VM's IP address, is the 139. And that's great. So it looks to me like we're ready. So let me do the NS lookup. Yeah. So NS lookup to, I did that backwards, but I want to do the Death Star service. So this should work. Now the question is, did that lookup get seen encrypted? So I can actually bounce to the node level. This is not inside a container running the node, but this is the K3S node at the host level, right? And I can actually do the TCP dump instruction. So now I'm, oh, got a sudo. Now if I do this again, fingers crossed, it showed up in the encrypted channel. So I'm doing DNS lookups. And now if we actually do the curl, ship landed, and there should be a ton of information now in the TCP dump, basically showing that I just successfully did a WireGuard encrypted access to a service in your Kubernetes cluster from an external VM. And that is what is going to be available in the 1.14 release. And I just showed you from the snapshot. And I think that's where I want to stop. I think I showed everything I wanted. I didn't mean to do that. Let me go back. So hopefully that was useful for everybody. I'm basically 5 minutes in the hour. So yeah, sorry. I should work on the profile for the terminal. It's one thing I was concerned about. I will, next time I do this, I will definitely have a higher contrast font set up. So, but yeah, so that's all I wanted to show. I've actually, hopefully that showed you what you can do right now with external workloads, even before you start seeing new developments with what is under the umbrella of Cilium Mesh, which is going to be a lot more involved with working with cloud infrastructure providers, right? But right now you can do your own VMs as long as you have node level access, IP connectivity between your nodes and your VMs. In my case, like I've shown, I have a local network here in the house, and they're just both getting IP addresses. I'm actually running both VMs from this laptop, this Fedora laptop. I'm running 2 VMs and just giving it a host network. The same IP address segment as the laptop itself on the local network. So and I'm hoping that the snapshots features I showed you were interesting enough. I really love the snapshots as a new way for all of us to contribute as enthusiasts or non-developers. We can practitioners um, to really start digging in some of these things that are in development before the releases drop. I think there's a lot of value in just testing out some of that new stuff, even testing and make sure the documentation that works in reliably with the new features that are. That was actually the YOLO demo gods were nice to me, and uh, I will see you everyone in the Slacks. Um, I haven't actually really played with Hubble in this situation yet. I've been so focused on just getting to encryption working. I'm so excited by that. I haven't even looked at it yet. That's something I haven't. I would love to look at. I expect it to show up in Hubble because it has an endpoint, um, and the Kubernetes cluster knows about the Boba Fett uh, pod-like item. So definitely something I will look at next. Uh, okay, well, I think that's it. If there's any other questions that I really didn't address, you can hit me up in the Cilium Slack, and you can check out the show notes later, and this will be available for viewing non-live soon. Okay, thanks everybody. I think that's it.